This happened to me about 2 years ago, during a camping trip with my friend Mark. We had driven about 3 hours outside the city to camp in a large forest area that was known for its hiking trails. During the day, everything felt normal. The forest was peaceful, and there were a few other campers scattered around the area. By the time night came, most of them had already left. It was just us. Around 11 p.m., we went into our tent and tried to get some sleep. At some point during the night, I suddenly woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Very slow footsteps on dry leaves. Someone was walking around our tent. I stayed completely still, trying to listen carefully. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again. Slow, deliberate, circling the tent. I quietly whispered to Mark, "Hey, wake up." He groggily asked what was going on. "Someone's outside." The footsteps suddenly stopped again. For about 10 seconds, there was complete silence. Then we heard breathing, right outside the tent. Mark slowly reached for the flashlight. He nodded at me and carefully unzipped the tent just a little. When the flashlight beam hit the trees, we both froze. About 20 feet away stood a man. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring at the tent. The worst part was the way he was standing. Completely still. Almost like he had been there the entire time. Then suddenly, he stepped behind a tree and disappeared. Neither of us waited another second. We grabbed our things, jumped into the car, and drove out of that forest as fast as we could. The next morning, we looked up the area online. Apparently, several campers had reported a man wandering around campsites at night. No one ever found out who he was. A few years ago, I decided to go hiking alone in a national forest that was about 2 hours away from where I lived. I had been there once before with friends, and it seemed like a peaceful place. There were several trails that went deep into the woods, and most people used them during the day. That morning, the weather was perfect. Cool air, a light breeze, and the forest was quiet except for birds and the occasional rustling of leaves. I parked my car in a small gravel parking lot near the trail entrance. There were only 2 other cars there, which wasn't unusual for a weekday morning. I grabbed my backpack, locked my car, and started walking down the trail. For the first hour, everything felt completely normal. The trail was peaceful. Sunlight was shining through the tall trees, and the forest felt calm. I didn't see a single person. Eventually, the trail became narrower as it went deeper into the woods. That's when I heard the first sound behind me. A branch snapping. At first, I didn't think much of it. Forests are full of animals, and sounds like that happen all the time. So I kept walking. But a few seconds later, I heard another sound, leaves crunching. It sounded like footsteps. I turned around quickly. There was nothing there. Just the empty trail behind me and trees on both sides. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal moving through the woods. So I continued walking. But after another minute or so, I heard it again. Crunch, crunch. Footsteps on leaves. I turned around again. Still nothing. Now I started paying closer attention. I noticed something strange. The sounds only happened when I was walking. Whenever I stopped, the sounds stopped too. At that point, I started feeling uneasy. It felt like someone was walking behind me, matching my pace. But every time I looked back, there was no one there. About 10 minutes later, I heard the sound again. This time it was much closer. I turned around quickly, and that's when I finally saw someone. A man standing on the trail behind me. He was probably about 60 feet away. He looked like he had just stepped out from behind a tree. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. I couldn't see his face clearly because the sunlight was behind him. For a moment, we just stood there. So I raised my hand and said, "Hey." He didn't respond. He didn't wave back. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, completely still. I assumed maybe he didn't hear me, so I shrugged it off and continued walking down the trail. But after another 5 minutes, I turned around again. This time, my stomach dropped. The man was much closer now, maybe 20 feet behind me, and he was still completely silent. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't hiking. He was just staring directly at me. At that point, I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. Something about the situation didn't feel right. Normally, when people pass each other on hiking trails, they say hello, or at least acknowledge each other. But this guy hadn't said a single word. I decided to start walking faster. Within a few seconds, I heard the sound again behind me. Crunch, crunch. He was walking faster too. That's when I knew something wasn't right. My heart started beating faster. I didn't want to panic, but I also didn't want to stay on that trail any longer. So I picked up my pace and started jogging toward the direction of the parking lot. The trail curved through the trees, and I couldn't see him anymore. But I could still hear footsteps behind me. For the next 15 minutes, I jogged down the trail without stopping. My heart was pounding the entire time. Finally, I reached the small gravel parking lot. I ran straight to my car, unlocked it, and jumped inside. The first thing I did was lock the doors. Then I looked back toward the trail entrance. And that's when I saw him again. The man was standing at the edge of the woods, right where the trail came out of the trees. He wasn't walking toward the parking lot. He wasn't moving at all. He was just standing there, watching me. Even from that distance, I could feel the way he was staring. It sent chills down my spine. I immediately started the car and drove away. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. He was still there, standing at the edge of the forest, just watching. He never came any closer, and I never saw him again. But the way he stared at me that day is something I still haven't forgotten. This story happened during a late-night camping trip with two of my friends. It was during the middle of summer, and we had decided to spend the weekend camping deep in a national forest that was a few hours away from the city. The place was known for having long hiking trails and quiet campsites far away from the main roads. That was exactly why we chose it. We wanted somewhere peaceful where there wouldn't be many other people around. By the time we arrived, it was already late afternoon. We drove along a narrow dirt road that went deeper and deeper into the woods. Eventually, we found a small clearing where we decided to set up our campsite. Not far from the clearing, there was an old, abandoned cabin. It looked extremely old. The wood on the walls was faded and partially broken, and the windows were dark and dusty. One of the doors was hanging slightly open, slowly creaking whenever the wind blew. At first, we joked about how creepy it looked, but none of us actually wanted to go inside. So we set up our tent about 50 feet away from the cabin. As the sun started to go down, the forest became quieter. The birds slowly disappeared, and the air felt colder. We started a small campfire and sat around it talking for a while. Everything felt completely normal. Just three friends enjoying a camping trip. Around midnight, we put out the fire and went inside the tent to sleep. For the next few hours, everything was silent. Then suddenly, around 3 a.m., something woke all of us up at the same time. At first, I didn't understand why I was awake. Then I heard it. A voice. Somewhere in the woods. It quietly said, "Hello?" All three of us froze. For a few seconds, none of us said anything. Finally, one of my friends whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" We all nodded. At first, we assumed it was another camper who might have gotten lost in the woods. Maybe someone was trying to find their way back to their campsite. So my friend sat up and shouted back, "Hello, are you okay?" We waited. The forest went silent again. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then we heard it again. The exact same voice. "Hello?" But something about it felt strange. The tone was exactly the same as before, the same volume, the same pacing. It sounded almost identical, like someone had just pressed replay on a recording. We all looked at each other in the dark. Something about the situation felt very wrong. If someone was lost in the woods, their voice would sound different each time they called out. But this voice sounded perfectly repeated, almost mechanical. My friend slowly reached for his flashlight. Before he could turn it on, we heard something else. A twig snapping behind the tent. It was loud enough that all three of us turned our heads toward the sound. My friend quickly turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. The beam of light moved across the forest. Tall trees, dark shadows. But there was no one there, just darkness. For a moment, we thought maybe we were imagining things. Then the voice came again. This time, much closer. "Hello?" It sounded like it was right at the edge of the clearing, only a few feet away from our tent. My heart immediately started pounding. None of us said a word. We just sat there, listening. Then we heard another sound. Slow footsteps moving through the leaves. Very slow, very careful. Like someone was walking quietly around the campsite. The flashlight beam moved across the trees again. Still nothing. No person, no animal, just the empty forest. Then the voice said it again. "Hello?" But this time it sounded like it came from a different direction. Almost like whatever was making the voice was moving around us. That was the moment we all silently agreed that we needed to leave. None of us wanted to stay there any longer. We quickly started packing up our things. We didn't even bother folding the tent properly. We just shoved everything into our bags. The whole time we kept hearing small sounds in the woods around us. Branches moving, leaves crunching. But whenever we pointed the flashlight in that direction, there was nothing there. As soon as everything was packed, we ran to the car. My friend started the engine while I looked back toward the trees. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something moving between the trees. A dark shape. But before I could focus on it, the headlights turned on and the trees lit up. There was nothing there anymore. We didn't say much during the drive back. The entire way home felt quiet and tense. Even now, years later, none of us can explain what happened that night. We never found out who or what was making that voice in the woods. But one thing I know for sure, it didn't sound like a normal human voice.